FabFilter, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Pro R, the Pro L2, and the Pro MB, and if time permits, we'll also take a look at the Pro G. Let's go ahead and start ourselves off with the Pro R. I've got this glockenspiel that we're going to use at the beginning here. This is what it sounds like in context, part of an orchestral cover that I'm doing. Excellent. So I'm going to go ahead and solo this, and we're going to use this to start because it's really easy to hear the brightness, character, and distance controls, or at least the brightness and character for sure. So let's go ahead and go full screen here. So a couple of things that stand out with the Pro R versus other reverb plugins, namely when you scroll through the size control, the space control, it actually scrolls you through the spaces. There's not like a selector for different rooms. Instead, it's one continuous sweep. And you can augment the decay in a particular size room by simply changing the decay rate. And then the way you can get different colors of room is you can actually come in here to the decay rate EQ, and you can change how long frequencies will ring out for. So if you want less high end, you can literally come in and just bring in a shelving filter, very familiar, and just reduce some of the high end. So let's go ahead and start off with the space. Let's bring the mix up to 100% just so you can hear it. So at its shortest space, let's bring the decay rate down. At the very shortest you can get, this is what it sounds like with 100% mixed. Let's go ahead and move the space control up. So that gives you a sense of the space. At the very shortest, this is as short as it goes. If we go ahead and pump the decay rate all the way up, and then we pump the size all the way up, you can get up to a whopping 20 seconds. This is what it sounds like. So if you want that super ethereal kind of a vibe, you can do that here this way. Extremely easy to do. I love to use this to smooth out sounds that have release tails, especially samples that just sort of end abruptly or they end too soon. You can sort of add tail on real organically. We're going to take a look at the decay rate EQ on another source. Doesn't really shine the best on a glockenspiel. But what I do want to bring up is let's go ahead and dive over to these three controls over here. So first off, we have brightness. Very intuitive. You can get a darker sound. So if we bring mix it in, and then if we go over, we get to the brighter sound. Now over here we've got character. You've got clean, very little modulation, and as you move up, you get more and more modulation. So this could be great, especially if you're into producing things with a very lo-fi sound. Hip-hop, fantastic tool right there. And then the distance control. The distance control is fantastic. Basically, it's exactly what it says. Close, far. So this will give the impression of the sound being closer to you. And this gives the impression of the sound moving back in the mix. And this can really be fantastic. So a lot of the time when an EQ curve isn't doing what I want it to in order to position something in a mix, then I often come here, put a very short reverb on, and of course I would mix it in, and then I move it further back. And this often has a nice subtle massaging effect, especially to extremely bright sounds. It just pushes it back. Brightness tends to go away. Even when you have the bright control up, this tends to just sort of smooth things over. I found that it works very well on problematic vocals where there might be a single phrase that comes out in sort of an unpleasant way. So we've covered space, we've covered decay, we have stereo width, so you can go full mono if you want. Of course, it's a stereo reverb, so you probably are going to want to go stereo, and then you can even push it a little bit past that. And to wrap up the general controls, if you come down here to the pre-delay, you actually have a pre-delay control, but you can link it to note values. So let's say that you want specifically an eighth note, you can have that. So if you have some sort of specific timing that you want to accomplish with reverb, you can do that. So if we make this quite long, let's go for a quarter note. So on and so forth. All right, I've moved over to the choir sound to show this next part off. So with the choir sound, a little bit better for demonstrating the EQ curve that we've got here for the decay profile. So you have a post EQ, by the way, that you could use at the end to tailor the reverb however you want. I'm going to go ahead and remove this. I don't want this here. And what we're going to do is let's go ahead and give a boost to the high end, and we'll cut the decay on the low end. And this is just going to change how long the different areas of the spectrum ring out. We'll mix it in a little. Bring the decay up a bunch. And something I like to do, especially with choirs, is a lot of times if you actually leave the high end where it's at, we could even remove this and pump this up. We'll change it to a peaking filter, and we'll look for that lovely little mid section where all the warmth is. And if we even bring this away, you can get that really lovely mid sort of mystic quality. And you get that warm center, and you can control the highs really easily. So if you have, typically when I do this, I also have a lot of bell sounds going on. So it's nice to be able to tuck the choir right where I want it. And just to show you, let's go ahead, let's move it close just so you can hear sort of the difference on the close and the far. By far probably my favorite control in this plugin is this one right here. I use it so much. So all right, let's go ahead, let's cover the EQ, and then let's dive into a situation where we have a sample that's cutting off in a way that's not exactly the most pleasant. So you've got a post EQ here, and it works exactly like you would expect if you're familiar with the Pro Q3. This will be extremely familiar to you. So you can go ahead and click, bring in, for example, we could boost the high end if we want. You could cut it. And now if you combine this with the ability to boost the reverb time at these frequencies, we can even give a boost here. Give a cut. And you could scroll your mouse wheel as how I'm altering the cue while I'm doing this. And so very intuitive, very easy to use reverb. It's one of those that you just pop up and you're able to get going very quickly. And if you go through some of the presets, there are actually quite a few that are built around coloration for different rooms. You'll see them labeled like ambience. If you go to space, colored room A, for example. If you want to emulate spaces a little more accurately, some of the presets may be better starting points than dialing in every single little thing from scratch every time. All right, so I have here an example of something I do pretty commonly with the Pro R, which is to touch up these effect samples, impacts, hits, stingers. Sometimes they have weird audio fall-offs where they don't fall off suddenly, or I'd like to extend them so that they last just a bit longer. Here I've got a hit, and then we reach into another rise in hit. Let me just play for you this short section. That gives you an idea of what's going on here. And something that I often like to experiment with is say, hey, what if this was longer? And the Pro R, this is something that it could do very well. So let's go ahead and solo it and add a Pro R onto it. And let's just hear it do its thing. So I'm going to first bring the mix back. I do keep the mix pretty high for this stuff. So typically my mix values are sitting somewhere in the range of like 20% to 40% at the most, unless I'm being more extreme. So with this, I tend to keep this higher because we want the sound to overpower it in the long run so that the tail comes off, but we still want that impact. I do not want the low end to ring out too long on this, so I'm going to just dial down the low end a little bit. I'm going to bring the high end back up, and I'm going to lose the dip in the mids for now. And I'm going to adjust the cut to go a little bit higher. So basically, we can even lose the cut. Don't need it. I'm going to keep the sound on the further spectrum and going to do a little bit brighter since I'm looking for high end, dial down, clean. I'm not looking for very much modulation. We'll even go 100% clean. Let's just hear where we are with those settings. So let's go ahead and dial up the verb and let's give it a long tail, a really long one, like 4.5, 4.6 seconds, sure. Now let's go, let's remove it. This is what it was before. And so let's go ahead, let's dial this in again. And let's be a little bit lighter on the mix. And bring the sound, let's go for a closer sound. And something I might try doing here that I think might be a worthwhile move is I'm going to automate the distance knob over time to go further. And so this first initial hit will be very close, and then we'll sort of pump up to further away. Let me grab the Pro R again. I'll make it a floating window so it doesn't disappear when I click on stuff. You can even hear it. It sounds like it moves off to the side. It's kind of cool. So let's go ahead, and with this we can actually dial this up. And one thing I might try here also is doing a similar move. Let's do a similar move with the mix. And for the mix here, let's go ahead and I'm going to keep it, you know, somewhere up there. But at the initial hit, I want very little, and then we'll sort of fade it in. And with this, we could be quite a bit more aggressive with the length. And let's go ahead and hear that. So we're really only affecting the tail end of what's happening here. All right, it's time to move on over to the Pro L2. So the Pro L2 limiting plugin, if you're unfamiliar with limiting, it's basically just extreme compression where what you're going to do is you're going to place it on your mix. And this is in the case for a mastering situation. And let's say you've got your mix done, it's peaking right where you want it, sounds great. And now you want to start mastering it. What you're going to do is let's go over to a louder section of the track where everything's sort of going. And we're going to go ahead and push it up to right where this empty space is the headroom. We want to get rid of that, just sort of, you know, it's unused volume area that we have for when we're mixing, but we don't need it when we're ready to get it ready for delivery. So we're just going to go ahead and dial this up. And we're going to go ahead and start shaving off little peaks and bits of the signal. And this is referred to as the squashing of the signal. And how you squash it and how much you squash it's going to be determined by the style of your track. Is it EDM? If it is, probably going to hit it a lot harder. Or if it's pop, for example, versus an orchestral track, which you're probably not going to want to hit hard at all. You want to keep most of the dynamics there. So we're going to go ahead and pump this up a little bit. And this is where I want to draw your attention to the LUFS down here. So by the way, there's a full screen mode, beautiful, lovely full screen mode. And when it comes to LUFS, there's a few different versions of it that you should at least know about. So you have short-term, momentary, and integrated. Here, we're only going to look at integrated. So integrated loudness is on services that do use the normalization. This is the one they care about. So you're going to go online and you're going to see like different targets for different services. And you should take these with a grain of salt because, for example, YouTube has a -14 LUFS requirement. But if you master to -14 LUFS, Apple Music, for example, does not have their loudness normalization on by default. So your master will sound softer than another track on there that has a higher LUFS value. So I used to be pretty religious about hitting that -14 because I was under the impression that services were going to be doing loudness normalization. So take that with a grain of salt on where you expect most of your listeners to be. Don't sweat the exact target too much anymore. At least I don't. I've relaxed a bit on that stance. But basically, you're going to play through your entire track. You're going to reset it and just take a look at whatever the LUFS are. Right here. I'm starting it in a very loud section, but earlier sections are significantly softer, so this value will actually be lower. And you're going to want to hit in the neighborhood of the target if you plan to release on a platform like YouTube. I know does a loudness normalization. So if your primary audience is on YouTube, you're going to want to hit their standard because they will do it. But if you're releasing on Apple Music, you expect a lot of people to listen there. You may want to readjust your figures and get some reference tracks specifically from Apple Music. So you can compare the LUFS that you're getting off there to the ones that you're probably going to want to aim for as a reference track. And you can set those targets here. So you could go in, you can set a new target and move it around. You could come in here. So we've got custom, and we could set this like, maybe they have theirs at -8. It's way louder. And so you want to hit there. You can go ahead and do that. So, okay, we've got the general idea down. I want to show you a little bit of the difference of styles, because something I struggle with when it comes to opening up plugins like this is oftentimes these are very subtle. And I'd like to get the full advantage out of them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up as a bus compressor on the drums. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to turn this one off. We're going to go over to the drum submix. And I've got a Pro L2 on here doing its thing. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a super hyper compressed drum mix just so you can see in an extreme setting how the Pro L2 is doing its thing. It also goes a long way towards saying how transparent the limiting really is. So let's go full screen here. Okay. Got our drums coming in. We're going to go ahead. I'm going to pump this way up, like way more than you probably should. And then I'm going to turn the output down. So you see this has been turned down quite a bit. Maybe bring it up a bit so it's easier to hear. And when you do this, it makes it really easy to hear exactly what the different algorithms are doing. And this also will help you, especially with drums, as a starting point, choose how you want your transient linking to occur. So when you hear channel linking, this just refers to the fact that what happens in the left channel may be different than what's happening in the right channel. And if you apply limiting and those two channels are limited differently, then what's going to end up happening is one may receive a lot more limiting than the other. And this could change the characteristic of the way your drums hit and may cause something you don't necessarily like. So you can link those channels together in a percentage format so that they get at least similar limiting on both channels, thus keeping your sound a little more consistent. And so if you have some extreme drum processing, you may find channel linking to be something that you want to mess with, but this is in the advanced tab, indicating that you may not need to come in here and change this. I honestly don't touch the transient linking or the release time very often, if at all, but that is what it does and why it's there. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to put this at 0, and let's just hear this algorithm do its thing. So we're on punchy right now. And let's go ahead and bring the attack way up. So it's going to be super aggressive. You can hear the transients take a major hit when we do this too, because we just brought the attack, super high up. We'll even bring the release down a little bit. And when it comes to bus compression, this could be a really great way to dial in some parallel compression, have this in parallel, and bring it in for some sustain on your kick. In fact, there's even a bus mode. Let's hear the difference there. And let's go to modern, which is by default when you open it up, it'll open on modern. And let's go over to transparent. Which we are slamming this so hard, and it's still, that's like really amazing for transparent. So there's some pretty clear examples of the differences between the various modes. Another really useful thing you can do with the Pro L2 is you can also do what's called stem limiting. So when you bounce your track with the final master, I oftentimes like to bounce stems. And you see here I actually have subgroups mixed in. So I have my drums separate. If I have any vocals, those are separate. Anything with the contact stuff, so this is usually orchestral stuff, That's all been separated. I'll balance them out individually. But the problem is if I go ahead and add all those stems together, I put them in my project because I'm going to do something with it. When you add them all together, you're just going to get your unmixed master back. And you'd have to put the limiter back on it. Where let's say I want it to, when I put all my stems there, to get my final master out. Well, it's a really easy fix. All you have to do is first bounce an unmastered version of your mix. So right here, I've got them both turned off and I've already bounced a master version of the mix. It's right here. And if you see here, it is called Into the Deep, which is the name of this track. No limiter. I'm going to go ahead and solo it. So this is what's going to be feeding my various subgroups here. So what I'm going to do now is I want to balance these groups. So I'm going to take my master limiter that's being applied to the entire mix. And I'm going to take this exact limiter with all these settings and I'm going to copy it onto each individual subgroup here. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so I've got the Pro L2 on all my subgroups with the exact same settings as the one on the master. And I'm going to take this unmastered mix that I've bounced. I'm going to sidechain it to each of them. I'm just going to show you one because if you could do one, you could do them all. And I'm going to open up the Pro L2 on that channel. And I'm going to activate the sidechain input. So to do that, you come down here and you push this little sidechain input icon. And it should be noted that you need to be using VST3 because VST3 supports inputs on effects plugins. So make sure that you've got that. And that's also, some DAWs don't support VST3 yet. So this may not be an option for you. You can go ahead and look that up for yourself. But what we're going to do is I'm going to come into the cog icon in FL. It'll be different for your DAW. And there's an input port for the processing. And I am simply going to check that I've got the channel that I want being brought in. Let's do in the sidechain input. And now when I play it, and let's move over to where some of the more aggressive limiting would be taking place. We see that limiting is occurring even though we're nowhere near the ceiling here. And this way, we get on each individual stem the exact same limiting that would occur as if we were doing it to the entire master with all of them added together. And this is how you would accomplish stem limiting. So really simple. The big things are just make sure you're using the VST3 version and that you just go ahead and bounce an unmastered version of your mix. And then you simply route it in via sidechain and boom, you can get your stems out with the exact same way they would be as if they had been part of the original master. All right, to wrap things up, we're going to move on over to the Pro MB, and the Pro MB shares some friendly territory with the Pro L2. They both are great for mastering. Now, the Pro MB has a secret trick up its sleeve. So typically when we're doing mastering, you'll toss on a multi-band compressor in a lot of situations in order to go through. So I just added a few bands. I'm just going to hunt for specific areas of the spectrum that might be causing peaking. In fact, one move that I'm going to do right off the bat is I'm going to move this all the way over and I'm going to set the threshold all the way up because I don't ever want to trigger this right now. And I could completely mono out the low end very easily. If you go over to the output, this top outer ring has a mid side control. So if we bring this over to 100% mid, we've monoed out the low end and we can dial that in probably to somewhere below like 80. I'll leave mine at like around 80 hertz. And you can actually change how steep these cutoffs are as well by just simply scrolling your mouse wheel. So I'm going to set this at 48 dB. And we'll go ahead and hunt for some peaks over here. So I'm going to just look for some areas of the spectrum that could potentially be smoothed out. This way, if I reduce those peaks when I feed it to the limiter, if there's peaking that's specific to a specific area of the spectrum, I could take care of that and feed the limiter a slightly hotter signal, which is usually considered a good thing, depending on the music that you're working on. So let's go ahead and let's search for a little bit of that. And we could go go in and begin to tidy things up this way and just get a little bit of the peaks taken care of. Take care of some mono things because you generally don't want a bunch of stereo information in the extreme low end of your mix. Now, something that's really cool here is, let's say I wanted to be really aggressive or really subtle. If you were to go with linear phase, you risk pre-ringing, which would not be a good thing. And if you were to go with minimum phase, you're going to get a phase shift just for having filters all over the place. So they have a go-between, actually. It's called dynamic phase. It's down here at the bottom. And dynamic phase, it will essentially do what it has to, avoiding all the technical stuff I don't understand. It'll minimize what it has to do phase-wise to your signal in order to get the same result. So if we did something more extreme, it'll be more extreme, but it's doing as little as it has to. So it'll color your signal the least. And if we make it very subtle, it'll also be very subtle, and the phase shifting will be much less. So this makes it extremely good for mastering, because if you want to come in and do something subtle and just move things around, you can rest assured that this is going to do as little to your signal in the way of phase shift and possible coloration as possible. So that's a little bit on its use when it comes to limiting. If we come over, let's go ahead and take a look at a bus use case. So I've got a drum bus here, and we're going to add a Pro MB on there. And something I like to do is the Pro MB is capable of upwards and downwards compression, as well as upwards and downwards expansion. And I oftentimes like to use expansion as a kind of transient shaping tool. So if we go ahead and come over here to where some drums are popping off. So let's say I want to bring the snare up. All I need to do is place a band there. I'm going to bring it up for expansion. I'm going to change it to expand mode. And now it's going to pop up and it receives a signal there. And we need to set our threshold so that when it passes the threshold, it'll actually do a boost instead of a cut. So it's kind of like a dynamic EQ. And I want a strong attack because I want this to act as a transient shaper. And we'll also have a shorter release. We could go ahead and dial this down to control the kick. And let's just make this more extreme so it's a little easier to hear. So that's with it. Let's go ahead and bypass it. If we go ahead and dial this up over to where the snare is. Let's say that this high end right here, I'd like to reduce it a bit, but I'd really just like to affect the beginning as a kind of transient shaper. I'm going to go ahead and do this. So this is just bus processing in general. And I'm going to, in this case, choose compress. I'm going to bring the threshold after I start playing it and bring the range down a little bit. Again, I want a fast attack for this particular case. I'm also going to reduce this a smidge. And in this way, you can go through and very quickly smooth out material. If you have a vocal and you want to de-ess it, you can simply come in, you can add a band, and you can get right to de-essing. Just leave it on compress, set a threshold, and you're pretty much done. You can move on. Extremely intuitive to use, very quick. And oftentimes, once I'm done with this, I'm on my way. Finally, to wrap everything up, I've got a Pro L2, a Pro MB, and a Pro G here, and they are all doing little things to my vocal chain. So I do a lot of spoken word stuff, and so I have a chain automatically set up. So with the Pro G, extremely easy to set up. You could actually do this with the Pro MB, or if you have the Pro C2, you could also do something kind of similar. But essentially, just have it set up to be a downward expander and to act as a gate. And when my voice goes below a certain value, that is just going to be turned off. So I said that with my threshold, it's at -30 right now. out of the synth to the DAW. You see right there, all that noise is just gone. So thanks for watching and have a blessed day.